With the advent of the cloud comes new lingo, BCDR, Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery, which is actually not new, it's just a repackaged traditional approach put into the cloud. So imagine we have a business headquarters which has business staff doing their day-to-day 9 to 5 jobs, and regardless of the cloud, the whole business continuity and disaster recovery planning all happens behind the scenes while the workers carry on with their day job and their chit-chat. Now, I explained in great technical detail in my previous video on BCP planning on the technicalities around this, but just as a very quick refresher, here are some elements of BCP planning. Starting arguably with the most important being a business impact assessment, which then dictates the risks, and then you can identify priorities and the critical assets and make continuity planning and strategy decisions, with the ultimate goal of evaluating potential disasters to the business and to prevent any business interruption as such as a fire, or a volcano, or a tornado, or any disaster really, man-made or natural. Remember, the goal of BC or BCP is to prevent business interruptions. Well, actually, to be more technically specific, there is a nuance here. The term BC, business continuity, is key to the actual continuation of services, whereas the BCP is the plan behind the BC, aka the P, is not critical to the continuation of services. It's more like predicting the interruption that may occur, and BC is the key, as I say, to continuation of services. Now, on the topic of disaster recovery, DR, let's expand this a little more. In the case that an interruption does occur, this is where disaster recovery kicks in. Disaster recovery is a subset of business continuity. However, there is a difference where disaster recovery is the technical arm of BC, meaning when actual recovery or restoration of services is needed, that's when you enact disaster recovery, aka a disaster has happened. And to make this crystal clear for avoidance of any doubt, BCP is an umbrella term of which DRP sits underneath. And the common theme of both of these is documentation, and yes, documentation. And to bring the key differences into light, let's use a further analogy. Let's imagine the business HQ was flooded, and the BCP would be very high level, as in what would we do if there was a flood? Predictions, remember? Whereas a DRP is when a flood has occurred, this is a disaster, and this is what we need to do. So there is a difference in scope, purpose, and detail of the two types of plans. But ultimately, the two types of plans complement each other, and there is an important technical keynote on this point. The first point of call in an event of a disaster is to look for the proper documentation that contains all the procedures and guidelines on how to deal with that disaster. And again, that is why the P in the plans is important, aka BCP and DRP. And now, very briefly, what are those plans actually entailing? Well, for BCP, here are the steps. Now, I'm not going to go into detail into these steps, as this was done in a previous technical video, which I've linked here. But I have put it here just to contextualize this video for your information. And as for disasters, well, we just need to know what are disasters. These can be man-made or natural. But ultimately, not all incidents are necessarily disasters. Now, there are various types of metrics you may hear or come across for your exam, be it CCSP or CISSP. So, with BIA's business impact assessments, here are some metrics around that. But talking more broadly in BCDR space, here are some related metrics that you probably need to be aware of. So, let's start with the RTO, Recovery Time Objective. And this represents the maximum amount of time that is needed to bring critical business functions back to normal operating status before that business is crushed. So, let's imagine an analogy of a business being crushed to remember that is what RTO is. Now let's keep the sand timer at the top of the screen because all these metrics ultimately rely on time and how fast something can be done in order to meet the metric goal. After which, let's move on to the next metric, which is Recovery Point Objective, which is a measure of a point in time that a business can go back to and salvage enough data to fully operate again, assuming that there has been an interruption or incident. And moving on to Mean Time to Failure, MTTF, which is a measure of how long something is supposed to operate before failure. For example, the computer monitor screen that an employee is working on. And let's say the screen has a manufacturer mean time to failure of about 1 year before the fuse will blow and the screen will stop working. Now, there is another metric called mean time to repair, which means that even in the event of a failure, let's say the computer screen can actually be fixed. This is where the MTTR comes into play. It is the amount of time that's required to bring a critical business function or electrical equipment back to operation. So in this example, the mean time to repair for a monitor would need to be quick because the employee cannot do his job otherwise. However, if the employee had a dual monitor setup and monitor 1 failed but monitor 2 continues, then the mean time to repair for monitor 1 would not be that high because monitor 2 will carry on working. This means the mean time to repair for monitor 1 could be a bit longer because the employee could carry on using monitor 2, but it will come to a point where monitor 1 will need to be fixed, and that's where the MTTR for monitor 1 needs to be defined. And now, to recap this video based on our learnings, the BCDR summary or context could be explained like this. BCDR is a capability of an organization to do the following things, as you can see in the bullet points listed. This is a definition for your CISSP and CISSP exam. And a bonus exam tip, you may come across the term Business Continuity Management System BCMS, which is a framework that works in combination to support the BCDR, as you can see from the definition explained on your screen. And that covers BCDR and BCMS, but what about the disaster recovery as a service? Well, here's the broadest definition of disaster recovery as a service, but actually it's a bit more nuanced than this, and there's some things you need to know for your exams. Simply put, disaster recovery as a service is a service provided to on-premise data centers to recover to or from the cloud, but there are several characteristics of the cloud environment that you need to consider as part of the BCDR plan we explained earlier in this video. Now, there are 3 BCDR approaches to disaster recovery as a service in the cloud, which you need to know for your CISSP and CCSP exams. The first approach is known as on-premises cloud as BCDR, which is a scenario where an existing on-premises infrastructure or data center is in place and where the cloud provider is considered the alternative provider of services in the case of a disaster. So, if the on-premises data center went offline, then the cloud would kick in and the alternative provider in the cloud would start. But this may require some careful planning in that physical machines may need to be converted into workloads in a virtual environment for this to all work. The next approach is assuming that the organization has migrated away from an on-premises infrastructure to a cloud provider known as Cloud Consumer Primary Provider (BCDR). This means that the business relies on the cloud to provide its data centers, and the cloud needs to provide resiliency. For example, if Cloud Data Center 1 went down, Cloud Data Center 2 would kick in. All this is handled by the cloud provider, but the customer needs to be aware. And the last approach is similar to the one just discussed. However, there is a difference. Instead of using one cloud provider, there is 2 cloud providers, aka 2 totally different platforms. For example, AWS and Azure. So if one data center from AWS goes down, the data center from Azure kicks in. I hope that introduction has been useful and very targeted, since I tried to target 2 different exams in one video, being the CISSP and CCSP in this example. But these videos do take me some time to make, so all your likes and subscribe really help support this channel and let me know that you are enjoying the content that I am creating. Thank you to all our subscribers who have subscribed so far. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed the content as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you would like to see more content like this, it would be super fantastic if you could leave a like and subscribe to help support this channel's growth.